Alicia, there were a number of ballot initiatives in states across the country, often amending their constitutions that dealt with reproductive freedom. What happened this week in those ballot measures?
It was a mixed story. So there were 10 amendments on the ballot addressing abortion rights. In 7 states, measures passed, and that includes in both Missouri and Arizona, where there were abortion bans or restrictions. So those constitutional amendments are going to expand reproductive rights access within those states. We also saw some losses, though. So in Florida, the measure, constitutional amendment to protect abortion rights narrowly failed. They got about 57% of the vote, but Florida requires a supermajority of 60%, so it fell short. Measure also failed in South Dakota. And then in Nebraska, there was a measure that passed that was supported by abortion opponents. So essentially, it codified in the state constitution abortion access up to 12 weeks, but then largely banned it after that.
Some other ballot measures did not do as well, and in particular, some that we cared about a great deal having to do with democracy. In Ohio, it was a bitter disappointment that the ballot measure creating a strong independent redistricting commission, to our surprise, and I think a lot of people's surprise, went down to a defeat. Uh, could you tell us what that was and what sort of chicanery may have been involved in the defeat, and also other ballot measures dealing with democracy?
Absolutely, and this was a disappointment and really kind of an outrage on a lot of measures. Just to step back, the gerrymander Ohio has one of the most extreme gerrymanders in the country, and this is something where they actually had previously had state constitutional protections against partisan gerrymandering. The Brennan Center was involved in litigation, as were many others representing community groups and others, and repeatedly saw gerrymandered maps struck down, and then elected officials essentially ignore those court orders and gerrymander away. And so what we saw coming out of that experience was a broad coalition of people, including the former Republican Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, come together and say, we want to have real reform in this state and come around a measure to ban partisan gerrymandering and introduce an independent redistricting commission to draw fair maps. And you saw broad public support for this measure, and then you saw shenanigans. And I think the most egregious component of this was really misleading ballot language that was introduced that characterized this constitutional amendment as something that would require gerrymandering when the exact opposite was the case. And that was language put forward by state officials, and then that was language that was given the okay by the state Supreme Court. And so ultimately, that was what voters saw when they were looking at their ballots on election day. And unfortunately, that misleading language won out.
One ballot measure that did succeed on democracy dealt with dark money in the wake of Citizens United, and once again reminding us that for all the focus on voting issues, as important as they are, that the corrosive role of big money in American politics continues to be the issue that has the broadest appeal across party lines and stokes quite a bit of voter anger at the same time. How about the races for state Supreme Court? Most of the country, justices for state Supreme Court are actually elected. And that has become an area where a lot of money gets poured in, where it has become very nationalized. What did we see about that?
So 38 states use elections as part of their system for choosing state Supreme Court justices, and you're exactly right. They've become highly politicized. A lot of more money pouring into those races. I think this story is also a mixed story when you see the results in some of these judicial elections. So, for example, in Michigan, we saw a liberal majority on that court expand. In Ohio, we saw a conservative majority on that court expand. In Kentucky, we saw a candidate that was backed by more, by liberals win and will be the first Black woman to sit on the Kentucky Supreme Court. In Oklahoma, on the other side, we saw a justice lose their retention election, an up or down election, and that justice had been in a narrow majority, finding a narrow right to abortion rights under their state constitution. So we saw, really a mixed bag in terms of the outcomes of those elections.
Altogether, given the threat that I think the new administration poses to constitutional rights and democratic accountability at the national level, how much can we really realistically look to states uh, as part of the response?
I mean, states are going to be critically important in the response, and state officials of all kinds. So, I mean, state legislatures, state attorneys general, and then also certainly state courts and state constitutions. The way our system functions when it comes to, for example, protecting rights, the US Constitution and federal law, that's a floor, not a ceiling. And so states can go farther in protecting rights. And we've seen that, for example, in many states when it comes to abortion access. Now, certainly there are still risks there. If you see federal legislation limiting abortion rights, then states are going to be limited in how they can respond. But we've still seen in a number of arenas, states, some states going farther in protecting rights than what we've seen, coming out of the federal government. And that's been true in terms of abortion access. That's been true on issues like the environment, LGBTQ rights. Another area would be thinking about rights to protest. Those are all places where we might be looking to state courts and state constitutions for protections. And we have seen in many states courts that have been quite independent of the political branches of politics in their states. And so I do think those are going to be important venues for rights protection, not across the board. It's going to be a patchwork, but certainly in key areas.
Well, thank you, Alicia Bannon. You will be keeping a watchful eye on this whole arena of response over the coming months.
Thank you so much.